One. And we are recording for part two of hopefully many with Mr. John Barnwell, who I now see has left the CIA and has now joined the Navy. And last time we talked about all things about really everything, but I did make a note of you started talking about, I don't know why I just said we started talking about like I had any idea. You started talking about the Hopi Nation, and you were like, well, we'll save that for another time. And I wrote it down, not wrote it down, put it on my phone, and most certainly am following up so we can do an episode about that. But Mr. Barnwell, please introduce yourself for all the people who were so rude to not listen last time.
Well, in any event, my name is John Barnwell. I'm an author of two books, The Arcana of the Grail Angel and The Arcana of Light on the Path, that present the cosmology of Dr. Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy or spiritual science. He was Austrian, and he has a tremendously intricate and cohesive body of work spanning some 6,700 plus lectures and 50 books and articles, and just the internal consistency of his work speaks volumes. If somebody were contriving and just making that stuff up, they wouldn't be able to maintain the consistency. They would forget what they had said, and it would be all disjointed, kind of like the way it is on the news. They can't
Yeah,
quite get their story
yeah,
straight.
yeah. It's
So,
yeah,
in doing that, of course, my closest associate, perhaps, and best friend is Douglas Gabriel from American Intelligence Media, and him and his wife, Tyla, run that platform. And in association with Americans for Innovation, with Michael McKibben, the inventor of social media. And over the years, we've been doing deep dives, coming up with primary documentation regarding many of the machinations going on in the world. And we considered it important that it was primary documents and not just like opinions of some guy on the internet or something. So we've been able to contribute. And of course, I'm somewhat of a sideline figure in that I just kind of poke and jab here and there. And there's a whole constellation of people in different places around the globe to contribute to this. So it's really quite a fascinating endeavor. But in the late 70s into the early 80s, I was the manager of the largest metaphysical, occult, holistic bookstore in the world, the Big Mayflower Bookshop near Detroit. And after I left, Douglas took my place. But in doing that, it brought me in contact with many different authors, gurus, spiritual teachers, sycophants, every manner of flavor of human endeavor across my pathway at that time. And so that was quite interesting, but I had been pursuing these things for a long time before that, and had been involved in martial arts, and I had taught yoga for some time, and I've just I'm conversant in quite a few different disciplines, although the perhaps the nomenclature only comes up when it's an appropriate context, like our last conversation. I thought you'd feel real comfortable in bringing up Ram Dass, that might be right in your wheelhouse. I guess I was right on that count. And but yeah, there's a lot of different people like that I've encountered. One of which was the meeting in Ann Arbor between Thomas Binyakya, the spokesman for the Hopi Indians, for the Hopi elders, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama in his first visit to Detroit area, to the United States, really. And that was back in like 1979, and it coincided with Pope John Paul's first visit in October of 1979. And so that all kind of fits together into a really kind of a interesting and somewhat complex narrative.
Well, I would I would love to hear that. Before we jump into that, I did kind of want to touch on what you said about kind of being involved with all these different fields and all these different interests and how you can kind of bring them up at different times. And that's something a lot of people have, it's probably the most recurring and widespread uh, feedback I get about this podcast is sure I was a biology major, but I mean that really is just not even come close to what I love to talk about or read about or anything in between. Right now I'm listening to a book on like the attempt to make war palatable in the late 1800s, and just before this was a book about the psychology of killing, and before that was a history of DARPA. And I like to jump all around, and what I've found is, and I've kind of I've used this analogy before, it seems like the wider diversity of subjects you try to become somewhat well versed in. To say well versed would be, for me, I wouldn't say I'm well versed. It's a lack of humility. Um, but the more you dive into these things, it kind of becomes, and this is the analogy I always use, it kind of becomes like math, like in elementary school. Bobby has 4 apples, Susie takes one. How many apples does he have left? Tommy has 10 watermelons. John takes 9. How many does he have left? And it's like, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. We can say elephants, or we could say CIA documents from Langley, or we could say anything, or Omicron variants, or COVID variants. If Fauci has 9 variants and the Greek alphabet is this many, how many variants does he have left? But what you're teaching is math, and it's this underlying thing. And if you didn't get the message across with apples, maybe you can use watermelons, or you could use bananas or whatever. I was wondering, if I want to ask you that, if you, because that's what I feel is why I like reading so many different things, because it allows you to take these core messages of addition, subtraction, and more so just other, well, obviously not always math, a whole bunch of different themes about life, and it allows you to kind of put your hand in like a different puppet. And for like last time, you used like Ram Dass on me, right? Or you had listened to another episode and you're like, you knew I had a sense of humor and wore a CIA hat, right? There's like kind of different little knobs you can use to approach someone. And because, as Terrence McKenna always said, I mean, we're completely limited by our vocabulary. That's the only, if you're more long in the tooth and you're maybe more eloquent at speaking or writing, you can get your feelings across more. But even that is just the simplest of, if you're sending an SOS with Morse code on a ship, that, sure, it conveys that they're in stress, but you're not seeing like sailors running around screaming, boiler rooms on fire. It kind of condenses everything to just a little, you can send an email and say, I'm sad. That doesn't convey like being next to someone, seeing them crying, and it's a rainy day and their shoulders are slouched, to where the more things you touch on, I feel like the more adequately you can convey a message. I mean, the best would be just straight up telepathy, if you could link your minds together and feel emotions and biases and opinions and memories. And we probably wouldn't have war anymore if we could all feel that. Um, a long way to say, do you feel that that is a strength? The more fields you can touch on, the greater number of math examples you can use to talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, it's all about uh, communication, and communication has the same root as communion, and it's like Christ at the Last Supper breaking bread, the bread and the wine, representing the bread representing the outer mysteries, and the wine representing the inner mysteries, and having around him all these disciples of his. It's this cosmic mystery that's happening, and it represents that whole idea of that there are many vantage points. Like Jesus said, he said, I have other flocks. Well, what does he mean by that? Right? Does it mean that there could possibly be people that he's considering that don't live in the county
Yeah.
in which he's living, or what have you, the city, the state, the region, and that's the ultimate import that you get from Rudolf Steiner's work, is that the mystery of Golgotha, as it's called, the Golgotha means place of the skull, and it's the place at which the crucifixion occurred, and at that place, that according to the legend, that's where the tree of Adam was located, and it's a symbolical image that is the root of our humanity, so to speak. And in looking at that, and but allowing people to be free to whatever approach they may have towards that bridge that leads to the spiritual world, that leads beyond the physical. And so I have always tried to be very sensitive to that. There are people from other traditions, and they may very well, as Rudolf Steiner is very clear, that other genuine traditions are relating to the same thing in a different way. And so, because if there really is this particular being, specific being, that is at the center of this mystery that we're all facing, it's perfectly feasible that he would have different names in different cultures, different traditions. And so that is one of the things that's most unique about Rudolf Steiner's work, is he shows you how to approach the world mysteries, and how they find their culmination in this event, which you referred to as the turning point in time. So we've descended into materiality, and now we're going to take what we've been able to develop out of that individual relationship to materiality, and then be able to bring that to the spirit, so that we have a conscious relationship to it, rather than the dreamy relationship we had in the early periods, going back towards the Atlantean period and so forth, before 10,000 BC. And so it's nice when you can come across somebody that when you talk to them, even though they're from a completely different tradition and you haven't read the same books, but yet they have the same fundamental relationship to it. And that's what came up with Thomas Binyakia, the Hopi elder spokesman that I met at that time in Ann Arbor. And so it's just a great affirmation, really, that we're all in this together, the great family of humanity, and what can we do to bring this into a positive event.
And another Ram Dass thing I just thought of was, he was talking kind of all along this note that the story unfolds in many different ways, and it's not, you don't have to go to the Himalayas and meditate with a guru. Like, they can unfold in different ways. And he always points back to this story where said he was giving a lecture in Boston or something, and this old woman comes up to him afterwards with this, she has the look in her eye that says, she knows too. And she comes up and she goes, I didn't understand a word you were saying about gurus and cities and old texts, but she goes, I understand everything that you were saying. And she leans in and she goes, I crochet, just, like I knit. And Ram Dass goes, he's telling the story, and he goes, I guess the game was bigger than I thought. That the message can unveil itself, and I crochet. It's like, I don't know anything about gurus or Buddhism, or, it's an old woman who's probably never left the city limits of Boston. I crochet. And well, I guess the game was bigger than I thought. But with that, let's get into the the tale of the Hopi nations and who you met, and the really what it is, because I don't know anything about it, so I can't even pretend to give it an adequate introduction, because I truly have no idea what it is, but it will be another tool that I have in my arsenal going forward.
Well, so back, as I was saying, back in Ann Arbor, we went there. Me and a couple other people went there with the express purpose of filming the speech of the Dalai Lama, and of course, at that time, it was before video cameras. We're talking about 1979, and so we're there with a Super 8, you know, and it was quite amazing because when you entered the room, there was all these people milling around, and you look up at the edge of the stage, and there's about 30 spiritual leaders and figures. There's like Tibetan lamas and Indian yogis and all these really fascinating individuals all congregating at the foot of the stage, and where the Dalai Lama is going to be giving his presentation. And so that was interesting, and I immediately recognized certain people, and it was like quite an experience to see them all in one room at the same time. But to move forward to your question, while I was there, I ended up meeting Thomas Pinyakia, the spokesman for the Hopi elders. And at the time, I used to wear a Celtic cross that I had. It was a silver cross. That's a cross with a circle. In fact, I have one over here, but most people have seen them.
Yeah.
They know what they are. And when he saw that, that's what drew him into his sphere of interest, drew us in, and I thought that was very interesting. And he started to share with us about there's the Hopi prophecies, that there's these ideograms that are on stone, and they give the prophecies of the Hopi, and they show that there's two different pathways leading into the future, one of which doesn't work out so well, and the other one comes to a peaceful resolution. And the Hopi themselves, they see that they're a part of the cohesion of nature, and that they do their sacred dance, and that helps to bring harmony within the world of the nature spirits. And so it's a fascinating culture, and I have a deep and abiding respect for them and all the indigenous peoples. But when I met him, then we walked over, because there was a TV set over, and it happened to be Pope John Paul, who was visiting at the same time, this first visit to the United States, between the 1st to the 9th in October of 1979. And he's on the TV, and he's giving his benediction and doing his thing. And who walks up but the Dalai Lama? Because he wanted to see the Pope on TV too. And so I introduced Thomas to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and they started chatting, and we're sitting there, us and a couple other people, watching this TV set that's set up on this stand, and right in the kind of in the center of the room, and it was a very, very congenial, like the Dalai Lama is just really a nice guy, and so is Thomas, and so it was just really a nice, warm feeling about the whole thing. But Thomas started explaining to him that in their prophecy, a brother would come from the east wearing white. And there you have the Pope. He's dressed all in white and he's doing his benediction. And he said, and a brother would come from the west wearing that color. And he pointed at the Dalai Lama's saffron glukpa colors, right? And so he gets into explaining that that is within the Hopi prophecy that was supposed to occur around this time. And I chatted about different things, and a friend of mine asked the Dalai Lama a question, and the Dalai Lama is leaning in very intently, and he says, more important than being smart, being clear. Because my friend was trying to like really give him this like deep question, and mind you, English is definitely not the Dalai Lama's first language, especially early at that time. He's gotten better and better over the years. But so
Such a
after,
great line.
yeah, and I had the good fortune of having the center seat in the very front row when he gave his talk, and he just kept looking down and beaming at me with this wonderful smile. But and later on, I ended up becoming good friends with Gaelic Rinpoche, who's like one of his cousins, and a Rinpoche, which is like kind of like a archbishop or something like that, equivalent in Tibetan Buddhism. And he's an incarnate Lama also, and that when he was a small boy, prayer beads, the mala that had belonged to him in his previous incarnation, was hanging on the hands of a statue, and it flew off the statue and landed in his hand. And so they said, yeah, it's him.
He's the guy.
And so whatever it means to be a Tulku, which is implies an embodiment. I mean, I could get into explaining what that might mean according to principles of occult science, but we get kind of off the beaten path here too far. But later, after that event occurred, and there's a lot of other details around it, but I asked if I could meet with Thomas Benyakia, and they set it up for me to meet them at a house in Ann Arbor where he was staying while he was there. So we went there because I had specific questions I wanted to ask him regarding what I had learned about the ancient periods, and to see how it would relate to his understanding. And so I immediately went to him with these questions, one of which was that, according to my understanding, the Hopi are a branch of the Toltecs, and the Toltecs came from Atlantis. And he said, yes, the Hopi are Toltec. We came from Atlantis, and other tribes came across Alaska and came down from Asia, and we taught them to grow corn. And so the kind of the central mystery of the Hopi is their agricultural mysteries, and the mysteries of corn, or maize corn. You know, it's a very colorful corn.
Mm-hmm.
And but he carries a little pouch with him with corn powder, and he did a blessing on me with this sacred corn. And the gentleman who had the house he was staying at, he said, you know, one time I saw him do his blessing in a river, and he threw it in the water, and the water bubbled up in response to the corn. So it's very much a living tradition, shall we say.
Yeah.
And I asked him about the Anna Blavatsky in Isis Unveiled talked about caverns that tie into North America and all that. He says, yes, there is all of that, but we got into some of those types of relationships, and I said, "Oh, and according to my traditions, this Earth is the fourth world." He said, "Yes, that's." So it's interesting to see somebody who has no experience in the things that I'm making reference to, and yet from his own tradition, he has the same kind of supporting knowledge. And of course, according to the principles in occult science, the Toltecs were the third subrace of the Atlantean, and so that makes them. And if you look into some of the indications that have been given regarding them, it was very much having to do with developing agricultural and mysteries of reverence for the land and the expression of the Great Spirit through the land.
Do they have do they have any explanation or myth of Atlantis? I mean, I know um for a while Joe Rogan was having on Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, and excuse me, and they were kind of piecing together saying that, there was indeed a flood like 11,600 years ago. And they're also looking at, I think, what they're called impact proxies, basically what would happen when an asteroid hit. And they've kind of got this dual. Graham Hancock was always talking about lost civilizations like Atlantis, saying how the Egyptians were far more advanced than our current explanation of them should put them at, in terms of, like, I guess, rock engraving and carving. And then Randall Carlson, before he ever met Graham Hancock, was kind of, he was going through and saying, like, oh, there is evidence of this flood, like, just the way, like, sediments deposited over North America, and looking at kind of these mass graves of animals and how, their bones have broken legs. And it's like, this wasn't a slow flood, this was a tsunami coming across the mainland. And he hypothesizes that there was an asteroid impact in, like, the North Pole or something, that pretty much vaporized, like, what were then the ice caps, and led to, like, an instantaneous, within 24 hours. It wasn't like this 10,000 years of rain. It was just this instant. I mean, I love it. It's a fun, at the very least, it's a fun thing to think about. Not, not all the people that died, but just the idea of, this cataclysmic vaporization and 1,000-foot tall waves, basically coming down the earth. And then he and Graham Hancock met up, and they found all their dates kind of coincided about civilizations disappearing, right? Atlantis disappearing into the sea, and these impact proxies. But the point of all of that is so there does kind of seem to be, like you were saying, the fourth world, like, there are these similar things that, regardless of your mythology or your upbringing or the books you've read, there seem to be these common threads. And the Graham Hancock Randall Carlson side of it is like, oh, like, these old civilizations, they really did exist. Like, these aren't just cave paintings, like, these were real. And Randall Carlson going, and here's, like, the archaeological evidence of it, and here's the impact evidence of it, and the climatological records. All of that is a very, like the Dalai Lama said, it's better to be clear than be smart. I'm absolutely the guy he would say that to, because I would say all of this, and you'd probably lean in and go, be clear, Thomas. No one cares about the names that I can rattle off, right? That's all window dressing for when you don't know what you're talking about. When you start citing things like I do, that's because deep down inside, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm on shaky ground. But do they have something that goes, not to completely,
Well, we didn't explore it in depth. It was just
okay,
I asked him. I said, according to my studies and coming from my traditions, the Hopi are a branch of the Toltec, and the Toltec came from the
okay,
continent in the middle of the the Atlantic, Atlantis. And he said yes. It was like
just okay, all
that's
right.
that's absolutely the case. Was the implication, and of course according to the cult tradition, the Atlanteans had seven subraces. The Atlantis was actually the fourth stage. We're in the fifth period now, and we're in the fifth cultural age of the fifth period. So there's kind of really a central challenge having to do with the fifth, because see, when you get into the fifth, there's what's known as the seven great mysteries, and it's something that I outline in my second book, The Arcana of Light and the Path, and that there's this apocalyptic way of looking at things that gives you core initiatory principles, and it ties into being able to help decipher what is essentially states of consciousness. And so if you want the easiest way to look at what we're doing here in this fourth world, that's waking consciousness, right? And before the earth existed, there was what's called in the Rosicrucian spiritual science, old moon. And old moon was a state of consciousness where we were not physical beings at that time. We were what? Astral beings, see? And dwelling in that room, in that realm, in a group identification, it's very much mysteries of sympathy and antipathy, and all pertaining to the astral state of consciousness, which would be like a dream consciousness, right? And then preceding old moon is the old sun evolution, and that's like deep dreamless sleep. That relates to the etheric world, which is the world of life, the world of the plants, and that's preceded by old Saturn condition, which is akin to trance consciousness. Okay, now why am I saying all of this? Well, as we evolve past Earth evolution, if we're following that divine spiritual stream, we will be able to bring to consciousness those stages that were encountered by us through our development in a more of an unconscious way. And so when we get done with Earth evolution, if we followed the wholesome normal stream, we will evolve into the realm of the archangel, or of the angels. That will be the future sixth stage, and after that, archangel, and after that, archive. So all of evolution has gone through this sevenfold process of development. And this is a lot for most people to wrap their heads around.
It's awesome.
But if you approach it, and you can go back to, say, for example, in medieval times where you have the minstrels traveling around with these legendary stories and all of that, giving you archetypes, symbolical expressions that came out of the mystery schools that would build pictures in you that would help for you to come to a relationship with these in the realm of ideas in future incarnations. So there's this whole continual churning of the symphony of human evolution, that there's these pieces that come together, and what it results in is ultimately a cosmology, in having a way to be able to come into a conscious relationship with all the various facets that are involved in our evolution, meaning that it's largely the relationship between the 12 mysteries of space and the 7 mysteries of time. And so we have that the time stream is coming towards us out of the future, and that's that astral stream, and it meets the memory stream of the past, and so that's the etheric. And so you have these two coming together, and when you can bring your individual identity, your I am, like Moses experienced it still outside of him on the burning bush and the column of fire and smoke and all these things. I am the I am. That's something that's worked unconsciously in man in the endeavor to be able to develop us to the point to where we can awaken to it as a conscious experience. And when one does that, you begin to orchestrate your supersensible vehicles, your chakras, the astral chakras, and then the astral chakras can imprint into the etheric body, and you can begin to claim for yourself a measure of eternity, because only that which has been brought to a certain level of development will continue on to show that you ever even were involved down here. See? And so that's why you have these great initiates that can reincarnate immediately. They don't need it. They've already done the work. They've already have developed vehicles. They are, like what the Tibetans refer to as tulku, is that they have embodiments that there's a continuation of, and it's deeply esoteric, but it's the central thread of this mystery that we're trying to solve, and it ties into Christ manifesting in the resurrection body after the crucifixion. That's the highest expression of what we're talking about, and that's a fulfillment of the prophetic streams of many different cultures, not just the Old Testament.
So it's kind of like finishing your test early in middle school when you get to go to recess early.
Yeah, kind of like that. An initiate is somebody who is manifesting future stages of development in the present.
Okay.
See, they've gone ahead of the class.
So you went and did your next week's book report this week.
Yeah,
I got
and
it
then
out of the
there's
way.
but there's other beings too that well, they flunked.
Yeah.
And they're still in that realm, and that's your spirits of opposition, and they assert themselves, but see, they didn't get it right, and so if you listen to them too much, you're not going to get it right either.
It's it again, it's
it's extremely intricate, and
yeah,
it's the most difficult subject I know of, which is why
it's why it's the best though.
taken me, I don't know, if I've been working on it 45, 50 years or something like that, and I can confidently say that I'm a somewhat apt beginner.
I would say you absolutely are. It yeah, you don't take advice from the kid who failed 4 times. Yeah, don't copy off his test, right? It's you got to figure it out. And like that, there's often no substitute for just studying and doing the work. You can try to sit next to the smart kid, you can try to memorize. Ultimately, I mean, I took calculus 3 times or pre-calculus 3 times in college, and I withdrew each time with an F. Other than that, I was a 4.0 student. And I finally realized on the 4th time around, I was like, I'm just going to get a tutor. I'm going to stay late after class, because ultimately all the extra studying I put in is nothing in comparison to having to repeat the class for a 5th time. And it was like, save the semester of going to class twice a week for 4 months, like just do the work. Mr. Barnwell, I gotta run to the restroom real quick. Can you tell everyone where to get your books and your website
Yeah,
and
sure.
Twitter and all that good stuff? Thank
All
you.
right. Well, in any regards, let's see here. This is my first volume, 640 pages, and it has a foreword by Douglas Gabriel from American Intelligence Media, and also includes extensive series of cosmological diagrams that I notate all through the volume. And my second book is The Arcana of Light on the Path. It's more of a meditative tool. And the whole series of diagrams are included in this book. Plus, I added a great many more so that you have a really full memory theater, so to speak, ars reminiscenda. And so my books are available in the continental US on eBay. You can buy them directly from me. If you're outside the US, you can contact me by private message on my academia website link, or on private message in Facebook. And or if you're capable of getting a hold of Tommy here, he can just hook me up with you. We'll work it out somehow. But they're available on eBay here in the States.
How
And
do I?
you can also find that information on my Twitter account at John Barnwell 888. And I have posted up at the top there is my academia link. And I also have the Crown Gate thread that I put together based on the research that we did at American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation regarding the machinations of the cabal.
Those it's a weird thing though, is the kind of more, and not to say this because I certainly have not, I would say I've maybe gone up one stair on the infinite flight of stairs to enlightenment, but it's an odd thing when you think about, the cabal, and not even in a conspiratorial sense. I mean, like the very real, Eisenhower, military industrial complex, Smedley Butler war is a racket, JFK for we are opposed around the world. Very real. I mean, everyone knows it. You don't even have to go into stuff that I like to go into, like an Illuminati or Great Reset, but rather just very real, right? Human traffickers, cartels, all that shit, terrorism. It's an odd thing when you realize that you have to love everyone, including the demons. And it's when you feel that discomfort in your stomach, like how, you can radiate love to maybe a friend who you had a falling out with, or, an ex significant other. When enough time passes, you can realize that you're just people who maybe went on divergent paths. It's very hard to look at a Hitler or a child molester or a drug cartel beheading people. It's very hard to look at them and open your heart, but I feel like deep down I know that it's where there's discomfort, there's work to be done. And an attraction or an aversion shows that there's work to be done. And man, it's kind of a hard thing to come to terms with, that, like you said, you can kind of transcend, or you can get stuck in the world of the opposites of the light versus the dark, the up and the down, the left and the right. And it's really, I don't think I really had a question in there. I think that was more just kind of a statement about that's a hard thing to come to terms with. What you were saying about kind of the evolution to the angels, to the archangels, I was going to ask, is there anything new under the sun? Or is it just all repeating forever?
Well, it's thematically it repeats, but it doesn't continually repeat in the same way.
Okay.
So like the fourth stage in the evolution of a being is the equivalent human stage, okay? But that does not imply that it was the same or is going to be the same way for other beings, see? Because they may have gone through their evolution uh, and their fourth stage, they weren't physical like we are. See? They didn't have a dense physical body because they didn't experience the same kind of cosmic drama that we did with the fall from the intervention of the Luciferic spirits and the Ahrimanic spirits, and the way in which they uh, infiltrated human evolution, but which give us the possibility of freedom. So that without that freedom, then we'd be
What are we doing?
really well behaved, but we'd be like really well behaved kind of marionettes. It's like
Yeah.
if
There's
you're
nothing
just like
there.
God's marionette, then you're not really expressing your own free will. So we have the capacity to make mistakes, uh, as opposed to, like, you could imagine other evolutions where they don't even have a word for lying because it's inconceivable that anybody would
Yeah.
lie, so it you have to have a wide open view of possibilities, because it's not going to be the same. It
It's
will be similar. It will go through. It's always, according to my understanding of it, is that it's always the sevenfold theme expressing, but in manifold different ways depending upon the individual situation. So it's absolutely incredible, really, that when you start considering these things. And part of the beauty of it is, Rudolf Steiner made the point, because he started a group with young people. They wanted to get an initiative going, and he was very encouraging of it. And some of the older anthroposophists became critical of these young people because they didn't dot their I's and cross their T's or what have you. And Rudolf Steiner said, no, no, no. It's not important that you always get it right. What's important is the sincerity of your striving.
yeah.
That's the thing that's going to lead you in the right way. And so that's why art is higher than philosophy. Art is older than philosophy. People were doing art before they were doing philosophy. Philosophy is quite a late stage development, yes?
New kid.
And so, in getting into understanding what is the purpose of art, the purpose of art is to keep culture developing. And so it's hard to imagine, but what was the impact of, like, the Gothic cathedrals on culture, for example? I mean, agriculture developed around the cathedrals. It was the Cistercian monks and all of these different orders were the ones that were getting organized agriculture going, and so that's like, wow, and you see everybody coming together, and you have the gesture of the praying hands in the cathedral itself, and then you can look and you can say, well, what about music? I mean, it's really hard to realize the extent to which, for example, Beethoven and Mozart and Bach and all these composers, the impact that they had on the capacity of people to be able to innovate. The whole idea of innovation that came about through uh, music,
Yeah.
symphonic music, and the operas of Richard Wagner, and I mean, it's people don't think along the terms to think that would contribute, but yet it does. See,
Yeah.
and that's a real key to understanding European culture, is that the central place that the arts have in the outspringing of cultural developments.
Yeah. Yeah. When you see a new piece of art, when you hear a song where someone's just doing something that's never been done before, just what I can only imagine would be like seeing Jimi Hendrix for the first time. It You go, well, this is occurring in this reality. He's obeying the laws of physics. He's using acoustics. I have the same ears that are listening to it that my parents grew. Or I'm saying this as someone like alive in the '60s. Your parents, your greatest generation parents were listening to big band music, and before them, whatever the hell, I don't know, the Charleston or the hell they were doing before World War I, or back and back and back. We're in the same paradigm. They're doing something. It's like when someone makes a painting, it's like they're using the same colors. I'm looking at them, using the same cones and rods in my eyes to perceive the electromagnetics, but it bends it in a way that shows that you're like, oh, there is more to this world. Like they're clearly doing. I don't know if I'm putting. It's like when you rearrange a room or something that's been the same for 20 years and you rearrange it and all of a sudden it's this whole new feeling and you're like, oh, what else is that applicable to in life? What other possibilities are there? Have we really found everything out? And on a side note, I was going to say about like the cathedrals and agriculture, that you kind of see it again later where not even to make some edgy statement, but like newer cathedrals of like the 80s and 90s maybe be like the American Mall. And what do you have around it, right? A bunch of fast food. And then you could fast forward to 2021, we would say that maybe our center of or not agriculture, of entertainment and I guess bonding, like the new campfire is like the big flat screen watching Netflix. And you could say the things that develop around it would maybe be like delivery or Uber Eats or something. And it's this weird, yeah, art does push it forward. It almost seems like art is like the horse, and like the rest of culture and politics is kind of just on a chariot that's like tethered to it. And it's like whoever controls art controls the world. And then ironically enough, the people that control art often have no desire to control anything. So it's just this mad comet flying direct without direction. And that's where society goes. I just talked myself into a rabbit hole. Now I don't know how to get out of it.
Well, that's good because if you go back to the great diarist Samuel Pepys, who was he wrote his diaries and he had his own code, and once it was decoded, it became quite a thing to understand. He was contemporary with like the into the Elizabethan and the Stuart period and all of that. But so he gives some very interesting pictures of that period of time. But he says uh, culture is that which remains after you've forgotten what you set out to do. And so it's that whole idea that it's something that is organically developing. And so the problem with so much of what's called modern culture is it's intentionally a commercial endeavor.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's fallen, and you can see the fall in architecture because I don't see, my great grandfather he had a large construction company, and they built most of the Catholic churches and the Blessed Sacrament Cathedral here in Detroit, and Henry Ford's Highland Park assembly line plant, and all that. And you see the remarkable architecture that was developed, and there was so much character in all the various architects that were working in Detroit. And actually, Albert Kahn was one of the architects that he worked with. And in fact, if you watch the Tigers play baseball, if you look out center field, you can see the DAC, the Detroit Athletic Club, that my father's great grandfather's company was one of the companies that worked on that. There were several, and my grandfather lived in one of the apartments upstairs. And so Detroit was like this Paris of the Midwest. It's sometimes described because it has that wheel-like structure of the roads, like Paris, and you had 8 miles surrounding the city, and then all these roads that rayed in like spokes. And it was really a beautiful city back when I was young. I started out in Detroit, and it went into a decline after that. But it's going through a rebirth in certain areas of the city. People are traveling from as far away as Europe, but they're artists, and because it's inexpensive, you can get this
Yeah.
great big place to put in a studio, and just cost you a few $100 a month, And so that was kind of the way Greenwich Village was. And then it got to the point to where so many plastic surgeons and lawyers started building their residences there. Now no artist can afford to live in Greenwich Village anymore, so that's ran its
Y-
course. But it's that kind of something that happens as a result of people striving after uh, this creativity. They're following their bliss, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's because they want to be creative that culture arises. See, but if you go into the Gothic cathedrals again, like I was indicating, those are anonymous, though. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't know who it was, really, usually. I mean, I've studied the cathedrals quite a bit over the years, and there are instances where an artisan up on the roof, up where nobody ever goes, he just happened
Oh,
to put his name
yeah.
down, like that he was involved in this great endeavor. And so there's this kind of selflessness, this idea of wanting to be a part of that which contributes to the community, and so that's a beautiful thing, and that's that whole idea of that we're connected, that there's this, and that's something that really has more to do with the future, when it will be of our natural being, if we're within wholesome evolution, to be more concerned for the welfare of other people than for ourselves.
Yeah, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they won't sit under, right?
Yeah,
It's or great things can happen when no one's concerned with who gets credit. But I mean, I mean, you see that in New York though. I mean, I've always loved skyscrapers ever since I was little, and I still do. And I mean, you look back, and there will always be a case of looking back romantically at things that happened before you were born. And I would imagine if you went back to the 1930s, they'd be saying, "Oh man, those guys in the 1850s really knew where it was at." So there's always, one day, as much as I can't comprehend it, someone's going to look back and be like, "Back in the 2020s when people were real," and it's like, "What? What are you talking about?" But it's the right. You go to any YouTube video, go to any song, man. Back when music was real, and I'm like, hey, I was in middle school when this came out, and I can tell you right now, it was shit. It was we were all shitheads. But you're looking back, now you have 15-year-olds, and they look back and they're like Nintendo 64, back when video games were fun. And I'm like, dude, when we were growing up, we had Nintendo 64. We were like Atari back when it was real. So there's always that rose tinted romanticism. That being said, you look at something like New York, like the Art Deco period, and you look at like the Chrysler building and just like the work with like the limestone and the bricks and the huge like silver eagles, and it's like the beautiful, almost cathedral-esque top. And it is, you look at or was Penn Station, or Grand Central Station. And then if you like zoom out now, if you're looking at Grand Central Station, the backdrop is the monolithic, what was, I think, the Pan Am building. If it's not what was something and changed, just a huge, ugly, just looks like 1984 Ministry of Truth building.
yeah,
And but the thing is like, unless you are deeply into architecture, and as much as I like architecture, not enough that I could name names. I mean, I could say I think it's Adrian Smith designed like the Burj Khalifa. It's the world's tallest building. I couldn't list who named the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building, or it's so there is this sort of anonymous selflessness to build these great things. But what I want to say is what you're saying about people moving into Detroit, because yeah, you can just get this old timey mansion for like $10, not really, but you kind of see a microcosm of what we're talking about. It's not a direct repeating of itself, but it's like the history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's that. And on a microcosm, you can even see it. So it's like over time, it repeats itself in very similar ways, but then over space, it also repeats itself in very similar ways. From an electron and the proton to Earth and the sun to the sun in the center of the galaxy, you see these microcosms uh, of these cycles of, you go in, you create this organic thing, and it's wonderful, and then everyone comes in and kind of taps into it too, and then it goes through the phase of where it gets tapped by corporate, and it becomes this cash cow, and then eventually it's raped to death of any of its true artistic value, and they prop it up like Weekend at Bernie's, and then eventually it falls away and a new piece of art breaks through, and this is the real thing. And I mean, from the early Beatles to eventually it's John Lennon in like a $10,000 like mink fur coat, and you're like, that's not the guy that wrote Imagine. Like, it is, but it's not. There these kind of these cycles of, it starts with this burning, this new kind of going westward in the covered wagons, where you establish this true gritty whatever it is, and then it gets content and it gets bloated, and like Roman Empire indulgences, it eventually drowns in its own hedonistic pleasure, creates a metaphorical and sometimes literal wasteland. And then in that wasteland, you see kind of the rebirth of people coming back in again. And it seems like it can't really be evaded. There's almost like the waves keep coming. It's like that's reincarnation. The waves keep coming endlessly. You might as well learn how to surf, if that makes sense. Again, I don't
Yeah.
really know where I went with that, but
Well, it's very helpful because once you can begin to develop what you might call thematic reoccurrence, right? That there's this whole concept within esoteric Christianity of thematic recapitulation. Okay, so that in developing the themes of evolution that are tied into understanding the precession of the equinox is one of the basic themes. There was a book out that came out back in the 80s, Hamlet's Mill, in which there was an exploration of that theme. But there's this whole idea that a human being is the universe in miniature. So that's that microcosm, macrocosmic, thematic thing. And you see that in the classic representation of the precession of the equinox, which is the first day of spring on the eastern horizon, you have the sidereal field, the starry field behind it, okay? And it's going backwards through the zodiac, okay? And it's going like 1 degree every 72 years, right? And so that's the great breath, as it was described by the poet A.E., the Irish poet, theosophist, George Russell. But if you look more closely at that, you can see that that whole processional cycle is imaged in a human being, because what is the pulse of a human being, and its relationship between the rhythm of the heart and the breath. And so if you work out that formulation, you'll see that you take on average 25,920 breaths in a day, okay? Which is the precession of the equinox is classically given the Platonic great year as 25,920 years, see? So that you are a microcosmic image of this whole process. And so this period that we're referring to, Atlantis, the final sinking of Atlantis, the end of the ice age happening, it was about 10,000 BC or thereabouts, right? And following that, you have the Great Migration, or coming out of that, and from periods just before then and after, there were these migrations that came out of Atlantis from the mystery centers. And so you have a northern stream that came across Europe, and then you had a southern stream that came across and crossed near the Mediterranean through Egypt. And leading these were initiates, individuals that were in advance of the community that they were leading. And so you have these great figures, the Manu or Noah, all the Utnapishtim, for example. And this is something I've explored quite extensively because I created a relational database. I didn't create the software, but I compiled a database of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamian studies of some 15,000 volumes. You could look up subjects and it would tell you which books to go get if you wanted to find out about canopic jars in Middle Kingdom Egypt. You could enter it in and it would tell you, well, go look in this book over here, this one, that one, right? And by the way, most of the books on the subjects I'm talking about, people don't even know they exist because it's scholars talking to each other. These are like very limited printings, and it's just things that you would never see. You're not going to see them at Borders, or even on Amazon. And I also had done previously, I had done one on esotericism on one of the largest private occult libraries. And so I've had exposure to a lot of these different things, and it gave me the opportunity to explore primary documentation, regarding, ancient Egyptian, Akkadian, Sumerian, and all these different mythic streams, and they all seem to agree. So you have, like, for example, whereas in India they have Manu leading a post-Atlantean period in the pre-Vedic mysteries, whereas in the Epic of Gilgamesh, who do they go meet with in the Burgenland? And it's Enkidu and Gilgamesh, right? They get into their fight.
Yeah.
And Gilgamesh is said to be like, half. He's like a divine human, so to speak. He's like a titan, as they would call it in Greek mythos. But he ends up meeting Enkidu, who's also sometimes called the Abani. But they get into a fight, and Enkidu is like this primitive, hairy guy, and they fight, and they end up wrestling with each other for like, all day. And finally they go, okay. They called it a tie, and they ended up traveling to go visit this Tin Mystery Center, which should be in Europe in the Burgenland. But anyways, Enkidu passes away on the journey, but he becomes like a tutelary spirit for Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh goes, and he's initiated into the mysteries of tin, and so that the copper coming together with the tin, that's the whole idea, that's how bronze came into being, this coming together of the tin mysteries of Jupiter and the copper mysteries of Venus. And so you have this archetypal representation of something that's a very significant event in human history, bronze, because if you look at the pages of culture turning, you see that, like, what would happen? A new culture would come along, and they would have superiority.
Yeah.
Because, like, well, my weapon's bronze, and so if you got a copper weapon, I'm going to chop your copper weapon right in half, because it's, and then the Iron Age came along, and so there is this whole martial aspect regarding the interaction of various cultures, because they were all contained within their own stream. They were in these, like, culture centers, and they were developing in different culture centers. You could incarnate and develop certain capacities, and so many of us, most of us, have gone through all manner of various cultures. And in fact, Rudolf Steiner makes a point about the Old Testament prophets, that they were incarnations of individuals that had been through other cultures, and that becoming a prophet in the Old Testament, it was their first exposure to the Judaic culture, which is a fascinating concept. But it's important to keep in mind, Rudolf Steiner makes a point, don't just believe what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Just maintain a healthy suspension of disbelief, because the reason he's been able to be consistent throughout thousands of lectures is because he's dealing from experience. He's not just constructing things, trying to develop like a novel of sorts. That he's actually, and you can see it in some of his lectures where he's talking and he goes, "Oh, now I see." He's literally describing to you events from the Akashic record while he's experiencing it clairvoyantly. That's a point I want to make, that it's not some abstract notion that he formulated. See, so it's a difficult thing for people to grasp, but I just throw it out there. And but a lot of that, you can go to the Rudolf Steiner archive. Has been maintained by my friend over many, many years. In fact, he came out of he was involved in the internet before it was really public, the ARPANET.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this tremendous archive of Rudolf Steiner's works available, and you can go and you can do searches on subjects and look things up, and it's just an incredible endeavor. And so that you could check some of the subjects I make reference to on there.
I was gonna say, yeah, the another fascinating parallel between Gilgamesh and Enkidu kind of battling is like the very like civilizations that rise from it, right? It's bronze or copper to bronze to iron, and it's these sort of these metamaterial, sometimes metallurgical one-upmanship, where it's, who has better armor in World War II to the Cold War. It's, well, our new material, stealth, and on and on and on. And it is, but like those two battling, they kind of cannibalize one another or join together to sort of give birth to the next one. And just like the procession of the equinoxes or your own breaths, you kind of see that echoing out on larger scales of these two things battling, merging, becoming a new dominant thing. And then that dominant thing is used to beat the other person over the head. And then they battle, 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 merge and become a new thing. And, like breaking the sword and then folding it back over and melting it again. It's just all these, it's all so different, yet it's completely repeating itself through both time and space. It's just this echoing thing, but it's just echoing through different mediums, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what you can call apocalyptic thinking. So you could take your present situation in the fourth. It was preceded by three and followed by three. And the three following are recapitulations of the three that went before. So the first is recapitulated in the seventh, the second is recapitulated in the sixth, and the third is recapitulated in the fifth. See, so you have that, and so that when you start to understand that that has a relationship to states of consciousness relating to the Atma, Buddhi, and Manas in the Eastern system, or the spirit man, life spirit, and spirit self in Rudolf Steiner's naming, or the Father, Son, Holy Ghost in the normal Western Christology, that this is universal. And so it's a question of, you could develop a language system, and you're right about what you were saying much earlier, that what Terence McKenna talking about, that the boundary of your thinking is based on your language system, that there is that whole idea, the role in which linguistics plays. And that's part of the problem in modern cultures, that there's been a dumbing down of vocabulary, that if you don't have the word, can you think the thought? See,
Yeah.
I mean, that is a challenge. And so
Yeah.
then you get into the idea of about semiotics and symbolical language, and that all has a part to play. But again, when you go into the universal language, which is the arts, you see that you can plant a seed that will lead to a future capacity. So, like, for example, Rudolf Steiner characterizing the Renaissance as a period set aside for the spreading of Christianity through art. Boy, that kind of sums up a lot, doesn't it? I mean, and when you think about it, and then when he talks about, like, say, the works of like a Raphael or Michelangelo or Da Vinci, one of those, he says look at them as though you're wanting to come into relationship with the inspiration that was behind that great work of art. Like he said, if we're a being to come from another planet and see the painting of the Last Supper, he would he would immediately be able to derive from that something that's very, very central to understanding human culture. And I'm of course paraphrasing, I'm not using his
Oh,
exact words, but it's that whole idea that there's a participation of consciousness in higher beings. Like, for example, when they refer to Isaiah as a messenger. Well, what does that mean? Well, the word messenger, what is angelos? Angelos is messenger. Angel means messenger. So they're telling you that there was an angelic presence in the consciousness of Isaiah, that he's not just an ordinary human being. See? And so there's all these little keys that are in there, and that's why, when you get into, like, for example, Wittgenstein, who was basically the summation of Western philosophy, even though he came to it late in life, and he basically showed the boundary of language as it pertains to philosophy, and he became an understudy of Bertrand Russell, right? And he ended
mhm.
up, in a matter of a few years, okay, I figured that, okay, and went beyond it. And the whole set theory that developed out of Wittgenstein's blackboard drawing on just something he said, well, for example, you could do this, and he wrote on the board, and that became a basis of a great deal of thought of Alfred North Whitehead and a lot of different people to follow. So if you get into the philosophical side, that's all very interesting too. But I had a friend who used to teach philosophy up in Canada, University of Toronto, and he had this fascinating uh, head of the department there was a guy who his wife actually was a Waldorf teacher, which is the school system that was started by Rudolf Steiner. But this philosophy teacher, he had a student that was giving a presentation of set theory, and he the student is doing his thesis, and he's saying there are natural languages in which a positive and a positive equals a positive, and a negative equals a positive, and a negative equals a negative, and a negative and a negative that equals a negative. But there are no languages where a positive and a positive equals a negative. And the head of the department from the back of the room, yeah, yeah.
It's there's like someone wrote like there's no way in the English language to portray sarcasm, and then someone rewrote it, but every letter was capitalized, and it's the whole like there's no way to say that there's sarcasm. Yes, there is.
Yeah, when people on social media, they capitalize. They say, what are you screaming for?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like we're very, yeah, yeah, and it's just one, yeah. That just
Yeah,
cooked my
well,
brain. That was a koan in a way that just cooked my brain. Mr. Barnwell, let's wrap this one up because you have
yeah,
thoroughly fried my
I think
brain.
we're good. I think that we've given us stuff to think about.
I think we gave the old college try, and I'll shoot you an email. I would love to do another, and I'll put your books in the description, your website in the description, as last time, your Twitter, all that good stuff. And
And are we still, we're not still brought, well, this is just a recording.
yeah. Hold on. Let me stop recording. So
Yeah.